Well, here we are at the Marshall stage, the Marshall Theatre at the Factory, and we're very lucky today being joined by Gary Moore. Gary, welcome to the Marshall Factory.
Thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for coming to see us.
Pleasure.
Been a long friend of Marshall. You've come here for many years.
Yeah, I have, yeah.
When was your first association with Marshall?
Oh, back in Ireland, I got a 50-watt Marshall when I was 16. I was in my first band, Skid Row. I didn't have the speaker cabinet, unfortunately. The guy before me, who was the guitarist in the band, had built this kind of 412 cabinet, like an angle cabinet, and he'd put Formica all over it.
Okay.
Yellow.
Okay.
Really lovely. And he put Goodman speakers in it. But it worked. I mean, the amp sounded great, so that was my first ever Marshall.
Excellent. That was a long time ago. And when was your first association with Factory? 'Cause I mean, you've been coming here for a long time, haven't you? You've known Mr. Marshall for a while.
Yeah.
So, do you remember when you first came to the Factory?
Oh, yeah. I first came here, I think, in 1980.
Oh, that's quite a while ago.
And I had a band called G-Force at the time, and I came up to order a load of gear. And I ordered, I had 3 heads, 300-watt heads, and 2 8x10 cabs,
right?
2 4x15 cabs, and 2 4x12s.
Wow.
And I realised shortly after that you couldn't hear all the other speakers because they were too, the 415s and that didn't really kind of. So I ended up just with 6 412s and 3 heads.
Right.
Naughty boy.
Excellent. Well, you just mentioned Skid Row, one of your first bands, and that was with Phil, wasn't it? Phil Lynott?
Yeah, he was the singer in Skid Row. He didn't play bass in those days. He didn't really take up the bass until after the bass player brushed through him out of the band because he was having problems with his throat and his voice. So he chucked him out and we continued as a 3-piece, and then Phil formed Thin Lizzy and then he started playing the bass then. And he learned very quickly.
Right. Well, you worked a couple of times with Phil, haven't you, in Skid Row and then in Thin Lizzy as well?
Yeah, I was in Thin Lizzy 3 times actually, but the first 2 times were just really standing in for other guitarists who'd kind of absconded or cut their hands up or things like that. You know, like the first time Eric Bell walked off at the end of an Irish tour, well, halfway through an Irish tour, and he had a bit of he almost had a breakdown, I think, and so they called me in the next day and I finished the tour with him. Then I stayed with him for a few months and then I kind of didn't really want to do it anymore, so I left the band and went on to work with John Heisman after that. Then I went back in 1977 when they did the big Queen tour of America because Brian Robertson cut his hand up in a fight.
Right.
And then they wanted me to stay, but I still had obligations to this other band I was in, Coliseum 2, and I wanted to give it one last shot, so I did that, and then I joined them as a full-time member in '79. We did the Black Rose album.
Yeah. Right, yeah. Actually, I was going to ask you, actually, what's your favourite track you did with Phil? Because you did a couple of...
Prison Walkways.
I was going to say that was one of the first ones, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was outside of the band. The funny thing about that was I just went around to his house one night and he was sort of sitting up in bed. It was about 7 o'clock in the evening. He didn't want to get up too early that day, so I was playing his acoustic guitar and I played him the melody and he went, "Oh, that's great. He says, I could write some lyrics to that." And I said, "Nah, it's an instrumental. I don't need no lyrics," but he did it anyway. And we went in the studio and we were doing all weird things like we got an accordion to make it sound more French, all this really cheesy stuff, and I'd be playing the notes and he'd be squeezing it. And then he got a stand-up bass and put chalk marks on the neck because I had no frets because he'd never done it, just for the intro, for the slide bit in the intro. And then we did things like make the guitar sound like mandolins, playing them like very fast picking and stuff. It was a very quirky little record.
That was a great track, wasn't it?
Yeah, and on the night we were mixing it, Black Sabbath were in the studio, sitting behind me on a sofa, and Bill Ward was throwing up in a bucket at the end of the sofa, and Tony was sitting there, and it was the funniest night. We didn't know how to mix a record. Chris Tancredi, we were just sitting there, and how's a record sound in the studio? Not a clue. And we just kept playing around with it until it kind of sounded good. And then Ozzy started running against the wall with his hands behind his head like this, like an airplane, smashing his head against the wall. He had to go to hospital. He had like whiplash at the end of the night. It was such a funny night.
Some strange times.
Yeah, but I mean, it kind of maybe it added to making the record better. I'm not sure. It was a funny atmosphere.
So, what were your influences when you started playing?
Hank Marvin.
Yeah.
That's all there was, I mean, really, I loved the Shadows so much. I just loved his sound, and I still love it, actually. I still love his echoes and his touch. And I was really lucky to meet him a few years ago, and we did this thing for Fender down at Wembley, and he was there, and he was a great guy to hang out with. And he stayed all day and watched everybody rehearse. He didn't leave after he'd done his bit. He stayed all day. And he was like a big kid. He was like me. He was going, "So what kind of picks do you use? What kind of strings do you use?" It was just like typical guitar sort of conversation, like when you meet another guitarist. And he was such a great guy to hang out with. And I was like, and he played like Wonderful Land, and I was nearly in tears because it was the first tune I ever learnt.
Oh, wow.
And he played it, and I was just standing there watching. It was like, it was really moving, to hear him play it again. Excellent. Yeah, he was great. And then, there wasn't much, until the Beatles came after that, really. I loved George Harrison. I used to learn all his solos and stuff, like A Hard Day's Night, which was a really very technically difficult for its time. It was quite fast for that sort of era. And the Run Down and Help, that was really hard to learn, where they go, will you please help me? And it was really, really hard to learn. It took me weeks to learn that. And then he went on the London Palladium and played it all wrong. And he told me years later that he only had one Gretsch, and the roadie put the strings under the thing instead of over it. And so he couldn't play it properly. He was all out of tune and everything. And all the kids at school going, did you see the Beatles last night? They were crap. It was like really weird. And so, but it was great. He actually, when I got to know him years and years later, he told me that story. And then after that, it was the British Blues thing. So when I was 13 or so, I went round to a friend's house on a Sunday afternoon, and he played me the Blues Breakers with Eric Clapton, and that just changed my life in an instant. That was it for me. That's all I really wanted to do after that. When I heard that guitar sound, because that was the first time anyone had heard a Les Paul through a Marshall, just the Blues Breaker combo. And Eric's incredible, passionate playing, where he was, he was 21, he was showing the world what he was made of. He came... I mean, I don't know how he got so far so quickly, because he was in the Yardbirds before and he wasn't anything like that. And all of a sudden, you had this guy who was the best guitarist in the world. He just came out of John Mayall's house. He'd be sitting there for months and just like working. And he worked so hard at it, he just became the best. So when I heard that, that blew me away. And I borrowed the record off the guy because I couldn't afford to buy it. And I had it for about 6 months. I think when he got it back, there was nothing left of it. It was like, so I used to come home from school every day and sit there and try and learn all the solos. Like a lot of people of my age, my generation, I think that was the record that really turned them on to great guitar playing. And then after that, you had Jeff Beck with the Yardbirds, who was incredible. I loved all that Shapes of Things and all that Eastern stuff he was doing, because he was a real sonic kind of innovator at the time. And then you had Jimi Hendrix after that, who just came and blew everybody out of the water. It was like, even on the first album, he kind of did everything he was going to do. He did on that first record, I Experienced, and that was...
He was an amazing... At the time, wasn't it, when he came over and did his show, it was something that nobody had seen before, wasn't it?
It's incredible. I mean, like, when you heard that first album, it was like, where's this guy come from? Like another planet or something. It was like... But the thing was, when you're that age, only 13 or 14 yourself, you're so impressionable anyway. So it makes an even bigger impression on you than if you were, say, 21 or something. Yeah. So it really, it just got right inside me, all that music. And so I'd sit down and I would learn to play like him then. And I think all those guys, that I grew up with, because you only had about 4 guitarists then, really, of any real worth, There was a lot of guys who couldn't really play, but you had Peter Green, you had Jeff Beck, you had Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton. And to me, they were the guys. So my style is kind of a combination of all of that put together, and then a bit of me in there as well, really.
Yeah, I think I was, fortunate enough to have heard your new CD. And some of the tracks on there are very bluesy. There's also a couple of heavy ones on there, I think. Yeah,
there's a bit more of a rock edge to some of them, but I think what happened with that was, because we were touring all last year, if you come off a tour and make a record, it's going to be a lot more energy in it.
Right.
Because the record before that didn't come off a tour, we toured after that. But when you've been touring maybe for 6 or 7 months, and then you stop, you just can't wait to record another record, because it's like, your playing's very strong, your hands are strong, your energy's up, your inspiration's up, everything's ready for you, so you may as well get in and do it. And that's how the record came out. I wanted to make a more aggressive record this time, so it wasn't a coincidence that it came out sounding that way, really.
I think it's excellent. Really good. I really like the stuff on there.
Yeah, I'm very happy with it. I think it's a lot better than the last one.
Yeah. Okay, you've been playing some of our amps up here.
Yeah.
At the moment, and one of the amps you plugged into the back there's the Randy Rhoads one.
Yeah.
Did you ever know Randy at all?
I did, yeah. I knew him when he joined Ozzy. See, what happened was, I was living in LA, getting a band together called G-Force at the time, and Ozzy was living in a hotel because he'd been kicked out of Black Sabbath, and we were trying to get a band together. Now, the guitarist he wanted in his band was me. I know that for a fact because he kept trying, but I really didn't want to do it. I just left in Lizzy. I didn't want to get back in that situation where somebody might be a little bit less sober than they should be sometimes. Putting it nicely.
Yeah.
And Ozzy even said that to me. He says, I'd drive you mad, He says, I said, I know, I've just left Thin Lizzy. I can't do all that again, man. I couldn't do it. But he really, he wanted me in the band. So what we used to do was we used to audition people for him. My band would go to a studio, and if it was a bass player playing, I'd get up and play with the bass player. If it was a guitarist, and my bass player and drummer would play with the guitarist. So to help them try and get a band together. Because we really liked him. Ozzy was a great guy. We didn't have any, we just wanted to try and help him get a band together. Eventually he found Randy. I wasn't there when he found Randy. He found Randy in LA, and then they came over here to rehearse, and I used to go up and watch them rehearsing and stuff, and Randy would say to me, you know, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing here. He was quite apprehensive about the whole thing because he was studying classical guitar, and actually I think he felt it was interrupting his studies in a way.
Right.
And I said, no, this is great for you, man. You've got to do this, you know. And so I think I gave him the right advice. But the funny thing was, he came to see me in the Marquee one night. We played Parisian Walkways, and he turned around to Sharon and he said, that should be a single. It had been a single like 3 years before, you know. He didn't realise, but he actually incorporated some of that melody into Mr. Crowley.
Oh, right.
There's a bit, if you listen to the solo melody, he's kind of incorporated a bit of that into that. But he was a lovely guy. He was a really, really nice kid, really sweet guy, and great guitar player, obviously. Great guitar player.
Yeah, he was. Yeah,
Yes,
that amp we've done the reissue of. There's one based on when he came over here, because he came to the factory in sort of 1881. Had it modded. Yeah.
And what did he do? He had the channels connected.
It's cascading mod, I believe.
That's quite ahead of his time, isn't it?
I think it was. I mean, I think it's a testament not just to him knowing what he wanted, but also the engineers here at the time, knowing what they were doing.
Absolutely, yeah.
And okay, over the years, obviously, you've tried many Marshall amps.
Yeah.
You've collected a few.
Yeah. Oh, good. I've got about 100 amps. And
which is the earliest one that you've got? Do you know?
I've got an original JTM 45. I've got a small box 50. And I've got an old bass one that was purple, but somebody painted black gloss paint. That's a really good amp. So I've got quite a few old ones. I've got some of the Master Volume ones. I've got the JCM 800 ones. I've got pretty much something from each series.
Every series.
Pretty much, yeah.
So I mean, obviously a vast collection. What is your favourite amplifier?
Well, I've gone back to using the traditional Marshalls again now, the 1959 type. Okay. And I was using two of those for a while with two cabs with vintage 30s in them. And then I was just coming out of my pedal board through a splitter box into those. And that sounded really great, but then it got even better because I started using the hand wired. And that was better again. It had a more full sound to it.
Yeah, the hand wired.
So I'm hoping to use two of those now. But that's a great sounding amp. It really is. That's it's got more of a kind of a round sound to it. You know, it's got a bit of a more of an aura around it. You know, which is always good.
Excellent. Well, good. I mean, you always sound good whatever you play through. I think whichever Marshall you've got on there sounds great. So.
Oh, if you can't sound good through a Marshall, you must be crap. There's something wrong with it. I think
there's a bit of skill involved as well. So.
Oh, you know, yeah, but I mean, they're such good amps. I mean, they're perfect for the guitar, and you know, there's so many Porsche amps out there now that I can't be bothered with. You know, like a lot of the sort of boutique type amplifiers.
So many now.
And believe me, I try them all. I try everything that comes out. You know, I'm always typical guitarist. You know, guitarists are like they're always trying this, that, and the other. And but I always come back to the Marshall because I just feel it's got the right balance for the guitar. And you know, I mean, when I was a kid, I was going to see bands playing through things like this Hendrix stack here. When Cream had the same setup. They had two stacks aside, and I just loved the sound of it. I just thought, well, that's the way it should be. And in those days, they didn't mic the amps up because the PAs were tiny. In fact, they were using Marshall PAs.
Yeah, that's right.
They'd only have maybe 4 columns aside, so like 400 watts of PA.
It was trying to compete with the guitar.
400 watts of amps, you know, and the guitars were. In fact, you couldn't even hear the drums hardly. Like I remember going to see the Who, and you just hear a bit of a. You'd hear like the rag cymbal a little bit, and you couldn't really hear the drums that well. They'd maybe have one mic over them and one on the bass drum or something. That'd be it. So in those days, they couldn't really mix that front. But I mean, you could also hear the guitars and the bass, so that was pretty good for me.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you too.
Thank you very much for coming to us.
Pleasure.
And enjoy the rest of your tour.
Thank you.
Thank you.